Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LTA North Semifinals overview and analysis video in the Spring Split Playoffs. We are down to our final three teams as we've covered throughout this entire playoff run up until this point, and now we finally get to go from those series-by-series breakdowns to the game-by-game breakdowns covering these final two series of finals weekend. So I'm very excited. I hope you guys are as well. We've got a very interesting one here today. We've got a big favorite coming in, but a team that's kind of been a big underdog throughout this entire playoff run that, is inspiring a lot of people and kind of creating a lot of, I guess excitement surrounding the LTA North playoffs that I don't know was there at the beginning. They definitely weren't expected to be here, and we'll talk about that when we preview these teams. But again, let me know what you thought of this series or what you thought was going to happen down in the comment section below. I'm always curious to know where you guys land or kind of just stand on these issues. I'm curious to know what you think of these teams, whether or not the outcome that happened was expected in your eyes, or whether or not you were surprised maybe by how some of the teams or players ended up playing here today. I'm very interested to kind of talk about my own personal opinions about how this series ended up going, but of course, always good to hear from you guys down there as well. But without further ado, let's get into the content itself. What we are finally getting into now that we are down to the semifinals and the final two series of the playoffs is, instead of going series by series, because we only are covering one, in today's video, we are going to take everything game by game, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game that we cover, and of course, at the end of the series, I will be giving a series MVP, a player of the series as a whole, to kind of tie everything together. Only one series to preview after this. It is the finals. Remember, the LTA North is unfortunately, merged with the LTA South, as negative as that has impacted both of those regions, which means that this is not a qualification series for MSI like it is for almost every other region in the world. Winning the semifinals does not get you to MSI. You have to be the number one team in the LTA North, because only one team is going to be representing the region at the midseason invitational. So usually I'd sit here and be like, we can talk about the two teams that are going, but you still got to keep your foot on the gas tomorrow as well, or I guess today as I'm filming this. But without further ado, let's get into the games and the content itself. Let's talk about the series and kind of just go over what my expectations were for it. Of course, it is a matchup between the number 2 seeded Cloud9 and the number 4 seeded Shopify Rebellion, and this was really not the matchup that I think a lot of people were expecting in the lower bracket finals, in the semifinals, if you will. Cloud9 makes a lot of sense to be here. FlyQuest has been incredibly good, but, Cloud9 just wasn't able to overcome them in winners finals. It was a very close, very back and forth series. I covered it on this channel. There were a lot of moments where it really did feel like FlyQuest were the better team, but there were moments where it felt like Cloud9 was pushing them as well, and that's a really good sign, because again, Cloud9 just needs to be good enough to be able to win on any given day, which I think they kind of proved that they are. There are a couple of players on this team that have been in incredible form, specifically the solo laners, who have been excellent over the entire split. Thanatos is the MVP of this team right now, kind of the leader of what they are pushing forward. A lot of teams, especially in North America, don't really have superstar top laners that can consistently be able to win on weak side, on strong side, dominate team fights. Thanatos really is an X factor for Cloud9, and we even saw that in the FlyQuest series when he really was easily the best player on Cloud9 and one of the better players on the entire Rift in that series. And I think you could say similar things about their mid laner, Loki, who I've been very high on throughout this entire split. I've been very impressed with his ability to actually carry games. Remember, he came over from the LCK Challengers League as somebody who, on Hanwha Life Challengers, was basically just a facilitator player, somebody who was playing Talia and Ryze and shoving and roaming every single game. He wasn't trying to carry in terms of the damage, but they started investing into him in terms of these more aggressive picks. Coming out of the mid lane, Blabber started playing a lot more facilitators, which we will get to. That is the style that's been working for Cloud9, and all of a sudden everything opens up just a tad bit more, and Loki proves that, mechanically speaking, he's good enough to carry games, and carry games hard at this level. He was an all-pro for me. He was somebody who was in the mix for MVP in the regular season. I really do think he's gone very under the radar for how important he's been to Cloud9 and how many resources have kind of been thrown his way to be able to generate leads through that part of the map. But it's not just a team that's carried by its Koreans, I promise. Cloud9 definitely has a lot more going for them than that. Blabber, while his form has been up and down, has looked incredible on those facilitators that we know are kind of his bread and butter. Things like the Sejuani, things like the Maokai, things like the Poppy. Like, those are the things that I think have really worked for Blabber over the course of this entire year. And I think the more we see him play for his lanes and kind of be there to let a lot of these mechanically talented players carry games while he can just be the best facilitator in the league, that's the version of Blabber that I think can get back to the top of the standings. And Sven and Volk Milk and have maybe been the single most consistent bot lane in the entire league, just in terms of what you're going to get on a game in, game out basis. Ven wasn't too great at the end of that FlyQuest series, which is a bit concerning, at least from my perspective, but they definitely should be better here today, and they definitely have an easier matchup here today. And so I would imagine you're kind of looking at all 5 lanes for Cloud9 and saying, you know, you're probably better in all 5 lanes. There's really, you know, no conversation to me where you can individually point out one player that's better. Maybe Contracts over Blabber, but I am not ready to have that conversation. Like, I like Contracts, but not quite that much. Like, Blabber's top, 2, top 3. Contracts is clearly top 4, top 5. And I think that that's very good for Contracts. He is an LTA caliber player, which everybody has not looked like on Shopify for the whole year. But again, Cloud9 should be the better team and it should not be close. But Shopify, that's what we've been saying about them throughout this entire playoff run. I didn't think they were going to win a playoff series, let alone 2 in a row. They have overperformed every expectation that you could possibly throw at this team and really, kind of come together as a team. I know they brought in DeMonte as a new coach, and obviously the vibes are immaculate right now when it comes to Shopify, and sometimes vibes can outplay talent, and right now that's kind of been the case. No one expected them to beat 100 Thieves, and they did that anyways. No one expected them to beat Team Liquid, and they did that anyways. Remember, those were the 2 teams that made finals in the winter split, like literally the top 2 teams in the LTA earlier this year. Shopify knocked both of them out of the playoffs, and so as much as we can sit here and say that on paper Cloud9 has a big advantage, clearly something is going right for Shopify right now that does not take them out of a series like this. I think specifically the solo laners have been unreal in this playoff run. Palafox has been one of the best players in the LTA in the playoffs after being one of the worst players in the LTA for basically all of the spring split. It's been a very weird transition for him. He really looked like he was falling off. You had a lot of people calling for his job, and likely he probably would have lost his job going into the summer split if he had not come out and dominated in this playoff run in the way that he has. We know he's a big game performer. He's always been someone willing to step up to the plate. These aggressive, melee-oriented mid lane players, they definitely kind of have that in their blood. He's built in the Zeka mold, if you will, but, it's been put on even more display, I would say, across this playoff run than normal, because he really has been the centralizing piece for pushing this team forward and for carrying games. I think you could say similar things for Fudge. He's been significantly more inconsistent about that. He had good games in the regular season. He had a ton of bad games in the regular season as well, but I defended Fudge a lot over the course of this split. I think in this playoff run, he has really stepped up and been, the better top laner against players like Sniper and Impact, where, they're the players that you kind of have to be better than if you want to be able to compete at the upper echelon with, Bwipo and Thanatos. They're the clear 1A, 1B in terms of, how top lane has gone. If Fudge wants to be able to play like a top 3 top laner, beating Sniper and Impact is the way to go. So, Fudge being informed definitely gives you some confidence in that regard. Contracts has obviously been very good in this playoff run, a bit inconsistent, again, just very aggressive. Some of their losses definitely come off the back of Contracts being a bit out of position, but he was the best player on this team in the regular season, and so you can argue that he is the reason they're here in the first place. And then B-Boy and Seos, some positives and some negatives. Seos, for the most part, has just been a consistent support, not really somebody with crazy highs or crazy lows, but B-Boy, kind of the opposite, will have some incredible moments. His positioning can get absolutely horrendous at times in terms of just how much he's willing to step up, but as a player, we know he can take over games. Again, he was first team All-Pro last year in the LTA on another Shopify Rebellion team that underperformed. That's how valuable people saw Bevo, even if I don't think he was necessarily worthy of that award, as I talked about a lot last year. These are still 5 players that have enough talent, and clearly the vibes and the communication are just off the charts right now. Like, this team is clicking in a way that even a team like Cloud9 or FlyQuest might not be clicking just because of how well things are going, and that could give them the edge that they're looking for. That being said, I predicted Cloud9 3-0 in this series because it's just hard for me to imagine a world where Shopify is actually relevant against a team like Cloud9 when they are pretty much objectively worse in every single lane. I think the miracle run ends here. If this team does end up making top 2, getting themselves into a finals, that's incredible. It's very Golden Guardians-esque of them when they made that miracle finals run back in 2023, but that miracle run was also shattered by Cloud9, and we'll see if they get the opportunity to do the same here. But that's just my thoughts going into the series. The only way to know how it's actually going to play out is to go game by game, and that of course means starting with game number 1. So without further ado, let's get into it. The winner of game number 1 was Cloud9, they are going to take game number 1 in this series. They're going to go up 1-0, and they looked very, very good doing so. They established pressure and tempo very early on. I talk a lot about how, especially in these Western regions, game 1 and game 3 are really the games you kind of have to win in order to make sure you're in a comfortable spot regardless of the series situation. You know, winning game 1 just makes it a lot easier. Only having to win 50% of the final games of this series does kind of take a pressure or a weight off of your shoulders. And then obviously for game 3, if the series is tied up or if it's 0-2 or 2-0, like game 3, being able to win that and go up in the series or stay alive or, you know, close things out, whatever, right? Like that is the turning point of the series. Everything else around that can kind of be finagled. I would much rather win games 1 and 3 than I would game 2, and Cloud9 definitely kind of showcasing that here in game number 1, picking a lot of things that I think they are pretty good at, picking a lot of comfort picks. Now for Shopify, I think they also went heavy in terms of the comfort, things like Orianna for Palafox that he's played a lot of, even if he's basically found no success on that champion. Bvoy clearly loves Senna. He's picking it in game number 1 of basically every series and early on in every draft, and then you've got something like an R5 counter pick for Fudge on the top side that he can also feel comfortable on. Like both of these teams definitely going for more understandable compositions in game 1. I like Shopify's draft on a baseline level a bit more, and obviously we'll get into draft. I'll talk about how we're going to go through these games, but Cloud9 just executed way better, and that's why they ended up winning. Again, the way that this format is going to work is we're going to quickly go over draft, kind of give my opinions and thoughts on where these teams kind of were in terms of their headspace, who I thought was going to win based on draft, or who I think, you know, had a better draft, etc., and then kind of talk about how that played out in the game itself by giving my player of the game and dead of the game. So talking about drafts, like these are two very polarizingly opposite drafts. Like Shopify really wants to play for late game, and they really have a lot of ways to play around this dual, I guess, damage carry comp of Orianna and Senna. If one of them can get online, it's going to be very difficult for Cloud9 to be able to match in the late game, because look at their comp. They really can't team fight in any consistent way, at least if they don't have a pretty gigantic gold lead. If Pantheon can move around the map and actually generate leads in the early game going into something like Poppy, all of a sudden, you know, Shopify's in a really great spot. You have something like Cho'Gath on the top side that's also very good, either for just deleting a target because his ultimate's incredible, or, you know, just being a frontline tank, being Cho'Gath and having a billion health. Like, you can talk a lot of ways about how, you know, Cho'Gath Orianna is a very difficult to deal with combination, and add something like Senna on top of that, like Fudge might become unkillable. And, you know, to all the people that are complaining about Fudge building AP and, you know, not being as useful, that's why he built AP. He's got Orianna shields, he's got Senna healing. Like, the entire point of this comp is to make Cho'Gath unkillable and have him carry the game in terms of the frontline damage that he's actually going to be able to do. And so Fudge ends up building AP. It just doesn't really end up working out because Palafox and Bvoy are so far behind Sork contracts and Seos. Like, it's not just, you know, Palafox and Bvoy, but it really ends up being a problem that your two facilitators get behind, and I think that's where the comp ends up really falling apart. For Cloud9, I hate this draft conceptually. I think it ends up working for how they particularly wanted to play this game. I think the picks that I liked, I really like Poppy in the jungle. I think this opens up a ton for this team here. Not only is Poppy just very good into Pantheon, because it's very difficult for Panth to actually take advantage of Poppy in the early game unless he's making like ridiculously good macro plays, but I think it sets up a scenario where both of your solo laners are likely just winning. You know, obviously Renekton's gonna have pressure into Cho'Gath and Talia is gonna have pressure into Orianna. That's pretty natural, but Poppy is a champion that actually can play through that pressure, can actually do something with the advantage and the lead gained by those solo laners. Again, the biggest problem I have with Cloud9's comp is I just can't imagine a world where from neutral they can ever play the game, like where they could ever like team fight in the later half. They have no damage going into the later part of the game unless like Ziggs, you know, Talia, Renekton are super fed, because none of them can be a primary option in these team fights, especially going into Orianna shield, Senna heal, you know, Cho'Gath and Nautilus frontline. Like, it's going to be very difficult for them to break through unless things go their way in the early game, which, again, lucky for them, it ended up going their way. So let's talk about it here. Player of the game for me is going to go to Sven in the bot lane, although I think this was more of a team effort than it was Sven in particular, stepping up and just being way better. But it's nice to see him just have one of those games where it's like, hey, Bvoy, I'm better than you. Like, it's not particularly close. We'll get to Bvoy, who just did not play this game particularly well. A lot of mistakes coming in from him. His positioning on Senna is some of the worst that I've ever seen on that champion, but Sven actively being able to kind of blow up, pun intended, a lot of these fights with the positioning that Cloud9 took a lot of them in. Really great setups coming in from both Blabber and Vulcan in terms of where they wanted to take a lot of these fights and how they wanted to pressure a lot of these fights, a lot of close quarters, jungle fights that can really create bad opportunities for, these, let's say, squishier champions, especially Cho'Gath with no shields, walking up and just having to be funneled into Ziggs bombs and Talia Q and Renekton flanking on the back line, and it's just really difficult to end up breaking through that. And so these close quarters fights that Cloud9 ended up taking really ended up benefiting their comp, and Sven, I think, most of all ended up taking advantage of that. Although I think you could give player of the game to Loki. He's the other player that I really kind of considered here. Pretty solid game from him on the Talia. I just think the bot lane gap was a little bit wider. Vulcan had a very good game on the Rel. Blabber mega gapped contracts, and I already talked about this. I like the Poppy matchup into Pantheon. If you would ask me before this series which of these two junglers would be playing these two champs, I would have switched these 100% of the time, with contracts loving things like Poppy jungle, but Blabber just completely outplayed him. Good matchup, really great execution. Excited to see Blabber stepping up and having a big impact on the game. And then Thanatos was totally fine on the top side. Even if Fudge was the one who was receiving a lot of the resources because he was building AP, Thanatos continued to stay relevant throughout the game. So for Cloud9, it's just a very stable, very successful win. Do I think you can beat better teams with a draft like this? Probably not, but because you are better than Shopify, you can kind of express that, and you played to the comp strengths, which is what you're looking for. And then for Shopify on the other side, like we said, just a lot of bad execution. B-Boy in particular, who's going to get dud of the game. I think a lot of people might give this to Contracts. I think there are people out there that would give this to Fudge on the Cho'Gath because of that AP build and because of the fact that he was getting bursted through, but I've already kind of explained why I don't hate the idea and what I can see, from why they wanted to go for it. But at the end of the day, B-Boy has to play better than this. This guy is just getting mauled in the bot lane. He was completely outclassed. His positioning on Senna is actually just below LTA level, and he was like this in the previous series against Team Liquid as well. They ended up winning that game, but it certainly was not because of B-Boy, and they're highly prioritizing things like the Senna. They clearly like this pick. I just don't think it works for him. He is clearly not good at the champion, so I don't really understand why they continuously go towards it. B-Boy is not something that B-Boy Senna is not something, I'll just say, that I've felt pretty excited about over the course of this playoff run. So he's going to get dud of the game here, although again, you could give it to Contracts because he was really out of this game. Pantheon does need to establish pressure early, but Blabber kind of mega gapped him, canyoned him in the jungle, if you will. Fudge was not as useful as he needed to be in the back half of the game because he couldn't really survive any of these fights. He was taking a ton of damage from Ziggs and Talia before he even really was able to get in, and obviously the chomps are great, but at the end of the day, if you can't get any of them off, it doesn't really end up mattering, and if the silences miss, you're especially useless, which is a really big problem. Palafox and Seos weren't exactly better. Shopify just felt a little outclassed on a scaling comp that they didn't really execute well. Hopefully they can bounce back in game number 2 because this just was not a good look in game number 1. For Cloud9, if they can come out and win that second game and go up 2-0 in this series, that's full control. That's, the team that's supposed to dominating, and that's kind of what we expected. But Shopify, if you can get back to 1-1, this series is still wide open. If it becomes a best of 3, we've seen what Shopify can do, even coming from behind in a series. So what's going to happen in game 2? Is Shopify going to be able to tie things up, or is Cloud9 going to be able to take that gigantic lead? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Cloud9. They are going to take game number 2. They're going to go up in this series 2-0 now, and things are getting very dire, I would say, for Shopify Rebellion. If you thought game number 1 was definitely in favor of Cloud9, they played better, even if their draft was a little weird, they certainly executed on it in a way that kind of proved that they knew that they were better, that they felt confident in this series. Well, game 2 just blows everything out the door. 2 total kills for Shopify Rebellion, and no pressure on the entire map. This was an absolute slaughter, and it came from multiple different areas. There's one in particular that I think a lot of people are going to latch onto, but honestly, there's really not a lot of analysis to do about specifically what happened in this game. It was just, players getting gigantic leads and then styling on Shopify. It really was just a hands diff, and I can't really sit there and quantify that. I'll talk about it, obviously, as we continue to go along, but not much to take out of that. When you talk about the draft in this game and just kind of generally what both teams were looking for, Shopify once again going for another scaling comp. You look at Azir, Kai'Sa, and you obviously immediately think, let's play 5v5s in the later part of the game. And then you look at Nico Skarner, and you're like, okay, full engage. Let's just try to play front to back. If we can get this big pop blossom from Nico, combo it with some sort of impale from the Skarner, we can try to separate at least the front to the back line with the Aatrox, make it harder for Wukong or, Sylas to be able to do their thing and set up for the Varus to win these team fights, and, just hope that Azir and Kai'Sa have enough damage to be able to win. I get the idea. It's a pretty safe comp. It's something that a lot lot of teams have played in pro for many, many years. This is a very standard draft from Shopify Rebellion. But what Cloud9 do on the other side is say, like, okay, well, we also can engage, pretty consistently. Not only do we have a Wukong, who's probably the most consistent form of teamfight engage in the entire game at the current moment, but we've got things like Sylas and Varus that can still win in teamfights. We scale relatively well, especially with gold, and you've got playmakers on this team. The difference is, like, yeah, Nico can be a big, playmaker with the Pop Blossom, but oftentimes it's going to have to put Nico in danger to do so. Vulcan's Bard has been incredible, not only this year, but really over the course of his entire career, to give him that champion and to allow the opportunity for him to be that gigantic playmaker on something like that throughout the second half, even though you banned things like Rakan and obviously wanted to take him off of those more engage style opportunities, it was a huge problem. Thanatos was super safe on the top side playing the Scion, and then you just get into the actual gameplay itself and everything just falls apart because it doesn't matter. Like, nothing I just talked about ever mattered. It's not, Cloud9 have to execute relatively well, Wukong still has to have these nice engages, and you can't really get separated by Aatrox, Varus has to be nice in teamfights. They were up so much gold by the time they ended up needing to care about any of this stuff that it really did not matter, and almost all of it came in the mid lane. Not all of it. I don't want to say that. That's disrespectful to the rest of Cloud9, but what a mid-gap in game number 2. Holy crap. Loki is obviously the choice for player of the game in game 2. I've really been singing the praises of Loki as a player throughout this entire split. I think some people have disagreed with me on that front. Again, he was my first team all-pro mid laner, and I don't know how popular of a take or an opinion that was. I know Quad was really near the top for a lot of people. Quid was still somebody that a lot of people really liked, but to me, Loki, I think purely from a spring split perspective, was the most impressive, and I think it's because of just how good he was on carries, how good he was with resources. He demolished this matchup, and yeah, like, is Sylas into Azira a Sylas winning matchup? Absolutely it is, in the same way that Varus Bard is absolutely a winning matchup into Kai'Sa Nico in terms of the 2v2, but should you decimate it like this? Probably not. Like, this is not one of those matchups that's unplayable for Azir by any stretch of the imagination. And then Loki is now stealing the Pop Blossom from Nico, and now, he's stealing the Impale from Skarner, or he's stealing the World Ender from Aatrox, and things become very, very tough to actually play against now that Loki has a ridiculous amount of gold. And quite frankly, mechanically speaking, he was styling on everybody on Shopify. Like, yes, he was styling on Palafox, but go watch those late fights. He's styling on Contracts, he's styling on Seos. It just does not matter. Like, this is just one of those games where it's like Loki was the best player on the Rift, and he made it really easy for Cloud9 to be able to win. Again, everybody else also played really well. I think Blabber had a great game here in game number 2. I don't think enough people are going to talk about it because of just how good Loki was in this one, just how dominant Blabber was in terms of setting things up. Contracts had a 0% kill participation. That's really bad. Like, I don't really know how else to say that. That's pretty unacceptable, and a lot of that was Blabber forcing fights in situations where he knew Contracts either couldn't respond or really had no answer to be able to respond with. Sven and Vulcan were very good. I love Vulcan on Bard. This isn't one of those games where, his Tempered Fates take over and, like, completely break the game wide open, but it still was very fun to watch. And then, of course, Thanatos playing, weak side top. Shout out. Like, he actually played it really well. He did a really good job on the Scion. So, credit to him. Cloud9 just looked unstoppable in this one. And now that they're up 2-0, things are getting very, very scary for Shopify Rebellion. And that's really where we're at right now, is not only is this team super far behind in terms of the series, if they even want to stay alive, they have to win every game the rest of this series to reverse sweep a team like Cloud9 that's way better than them in every role. But on top of that, their game 2 looked like they're just not in the same kind of form that they were against 100 Thieves and Team Liquid. This is a very vibes and mental based team. I think being down 0-2 is just really not good for the atmosphere overall for Shopify, and you can see that in their gameplay. The top side of this map was unplayable, not that the bot lane was significantly better, but Palafox, easy choice for dead of the game. We've been talking about how relevant and important Palafox has been to Shopify's playoff run. He's been very good for this team against, players like Quid and APA that absolutely were better than him in the regular season, but he has not stepped up here today. Loki embarrassed him in lane, and the Azir just ended up being incredibly pointless. A couple of, like, really awful plays. This was regular season Palafox in full force in this one, which is not what you want to see. I've already kind of called it out, but Contracts having a 0% kill participation is completely unacceptable in a playoff series. Even if things aren't going your way, you got to get involved somewhere, like, with something to be able to set things up. He was the only person on the team to have 0% KP. It's just not a great situation. Contracts felt like he was always behind Blabber in terms of what what he wanted to do. Blabber was very clear in terms of his vision and his goal, and Contracts just was completely left out in the dust in terms of how this game went. Fudge got blasted on the top side, couldn't really do anything on the Aatrox because mostly this Sion played weak side, and you can't really take advantage of Sion in that kind of way. B-Boy and Seos had some really bad moments. B-Boy was generally better, I would say, than he was in game 1, but Seos, like, what are you supposed to do? You're Nico, and there's a Silas on the other side who does your job, but just infinitely better because he has a ton of gold and he can deal damage. Like, it's just a really bad look for Shopify, and now they're down 0-2. They're one game away from being eliminated. I think at this point, the goal for them is to not get swept, hopefully to win game 3, and at the very least push this to a game 4, but Cloud9, if they can keep their foot on the gas and play even half of what they played here in game 2, this is not going to be a particularly close series. So is Cloud9 going to be able to sweep them? Are they going to be able to 3-0 them to get back into the finals and try to get their rematch with FlyQuest? Or is Shopify going to stay alive at the very least for one more game despite how they've played up until this point? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Cloud9. They are going to take game number 3. They are going to take this series 3-0 in a clean sweep, and they're going to do it in unbelievably dominant fashion. This entire series could have been an email. There was almost nothing to glean from it other than the fact that, yeah, C9's really good, and they're definitely better than not only Shopify, but likely everybody below the top 2 in the LTA right now. They have looked absolutely unstoppable, and people forget, like, this is a team that looked dominant at the beginning of playoffs as well. They 3-0 Team Liquid. This has not been a team that's really been challenged by anyone that isn't FlyQuest, and they took FlyQuest to 5 games. This is a very, very good Cloud9 team, and they have a very real shot of representing North America at the MSI tournament. For Shopify Rebellion on the other side, you know, going from a 30-ish minute loss to a 28-minute loss to a 26-minute loss is certainly maybe not the progression that you wanted in your clean sweep, but at the end of the day, this team was just happy to be here, and I think that they kind of played like they were happy to be here. They got blasted. This was not even remotely close. There was nothing that they did in this series that was even remotely average level. This looked like the team we thought they were going to be going into the playoffs, and honestly, the only question this raises to me is just how bad were Team Liquid and 100 Thieves to have lost to this team, because that's really the only major takeaway for me from this series is just like, man, Shopify sucked and Cloud9 was way better, and, you know, the top 2 are genuinely both very good, and congratulations to them, but, you know, the 3 downwards in the LTA might not actually be very good, and I think we might have, you know, learned that here today. But let's go ahead and talk about game 3 before we get into some talk about the series as a whole. Player of the game in game 3 for me is going to go to Blabber in the jungle. You know, I considered him for player of the series. He really was that consistent. He decimated Contracts. Like, there was no, you know, putting up any sort of like, oh, is Blabber better than Contracts or whatever? Yes, I think we can say pretty confidently after this series, yes, Blabber is better than Contracts. Blabber has basically always been better than Contracts, and, you know, especially on these facilitators, he just feels so comfortable. He feels so much more unlocked as an individual player, and it's really nice to see him get to play like that again. I really do feel like it's been a while since we've seen a version of Blabber where he can play with that kind of confidence and understand that he can trust his teammates to carry games. That's always been when he's at his best, when he won MVPs back in 2020 and 2021, like that era of Blabber, you know, that version of him was playing with a lot of really great laners, whether it be Licorice, who was winning consistently on the top side, or whether it be whoever in the bot lane, Sven and Vulcan, obviously, when they played in 2020, or, you know, Perks when he came over in 2023, one of those years, I believe it was 2022, you know, like, he's always played with really good laners, and then, you know, things kind of fell apart the past couple of years, and he felt more of a responsibility to carry. Well, here you go. You get to play with Loki and Thanatos and Sven and Vulcan again, and everything's just kind of winning elsewhere on the map. It allows him to do the things he's really good at, which is control tempo in the jungle and kind of take away opportunities for the other team. And again, that's just exactly what he did at a crazy high level. Contracts did not get to play the game in this series, and a lot of that is because Blabber was simply so good. I considered him for player of the series, but he'll have to settle just for player of the game in game number 3 on the Maokai. Again, player of the series was super up for debate, but to me, I ended up landing on Loki, getting player of the series. I think he just decimated game 2 so hard. He still was great here in game 3. He was really nice on the Taliyah and very important on the Taliyah in game number 1 as well. He was the most important player, and I will continue to pound the table for Loki, which sounds really funny because I was such a Loki hater, you know, going into the year when they picked him up from HLE Challengers. I just didn't really understand it. He really was one of those mid laners that you watch in the Challengers League and you go, okay, like, you have a couple of really really great traits. Like, you are a good facilitator, but you're not like a superstar. You weren't like a star at the tier 2 level. Why would I think you would be a star at the tier 1 level? Especially because I think there were other mid laners, you know, in the LCK Challengers League that probably deserved a promotion over Loki. But at the end of the day, Korean mid laners are Korean mid laners, and they can still take over games. And I think what Loki needed was just to feel more aggressive in terms of the way that he wanted to approach the game. He was clearly taught to be more passive and more facilitative in terms of how he played mid lane. He comes over here to Cloud9, and he's kind of given the green light to be a big carry for this team, and he does so at a ridiculously high level. So credit to Loki. Jungle mid was incredible. I considered Sven for player of the series as well, because B-Void just was so awful on the other side, and Sven, you know, completely outclassed him. Vulcan was really great, especially on the Bard, but was also great on the Karma here in Game 3. This was probably the game where he gapped Seos individually the most in terms of what he was able to do moving around the map and in the 2v2. And then Thanatos, kind of the weak side top laner. Bit unfortunate for him because he has kind of been a main character for Cloud9, but if we're talking about Thanatos last in terms of how C9 won a series, I think things went pretty darn well for the team. It's just all so good. Like, there's almost nothing else left to say. They really have just been dominant, and they really have looked incredible. They have not looked tested by anyone that isn't FlyQuest, and they're going to get a real shot to go back to the finals and perhaps get their revenge on a Fly team that they definitely can beat on the right day. And then for Shopify on the other side, like, again, the fairy tale story kind of comes to an end here. I don't think anybody's particularly surprised by the outcome, even though it was a 3-0. I think we all could have seen this coming. A couple of players who just looked horrendous throughout the series. Fudge, the only one who actually got any gold really at any point. I'm not saying Fudge looked good, because he certainly didn't look good. He was worse than Thanatos on the other side and was kind of a problem in some of these team fights, especially when he did have resources, because he wasn't capitalizing in the same way that maybe you would want. But everyone else, like, there's not even a redeeming quality. Like, Contracts couldn't play in this series. He was arguably the worst player on the entire Rift. Palafox probably was the worst player on the entire Rift. He looked mega gapped by Loki in and out of lane, especially out of lane, but even in the 1v1, things were getting absolutely terrible for him. They didn't even pick him something that he's good at until game number 3, which is obviously very disappointing, just in terms of the drafts. Like, I like them in concept, but they didn't really work out. But for me, like, B-Boy's dead of the game in game number 3. B-Boy looked awful in this series. Like, he looked like a player that could not even try to compete at top 3. And I understand. Like, I get the idea that B-Boy was a player who succeeded last year because the AD carry pool was quite bad, and certainly it was quite inconsistent. It took a while for players like Masu to really kind of click in, at least in terms of their top tier dominant performances. You had players like Yon that were incredibly good, but Team Liquid needed to kind of emerge over the course of the summer split. B-Boy, you know, received a lot of praise because he was kind of taking advantage of what was a weaker AD carry crop in 2024. Well, here in 2025, there are a lot of good bot lanes now in North America, and B-Boy, quite frankly, just can't hang with a lot of these good bot lanes. It really just is the case. Clearly, the directive going into game 3 was just play more aggressive, just start stepping up. His positioning is maybe the worst of any AD carry in the entire league, maybe the worst of any AD carry in any major region. It's really that bad. He can do some good things because he's not the dumbest player in the world, and his mechanics are good, but golly, man, like, he's just in the wrong place at the wrong time so regularly, and he's always way too far forward in team fights. It can sometimes get him positives, but most of the time it just gets him in trouble, and that's where he was here on Shopify. Seos also just got mega outplayed here in game number 3. I think he deserves dead of the game, but, you know, B-Boy was a little bit worse, and so it ends up going to him instead. Overall, it's just a terrible series for Shopify. They got exposed, but they got exposed in a way that was kind of predictable, right? Like, I'm not really surprised by this outcome. Nobody should really be surprised by this outcome. I know people were kind of riding the hot train with Shopify, and these lower bracket runs can happen, especially here in North America where teams aren't consistent. But at the end of the day, talent eventually is going to matter, and that's exactly what happened here. They ran into a brick wall that they just couldn't quite overcome, and they were not on the same level as Cloud9. They go out in 3rd place, which again is still very good, but not good enough. And for Cloud9, they move on now to the finals to take on FlyQuest to get that rematch. We'll preview that in just a second, but congratulations to this team. It is a clear big 2 right now in North America, and honestly, with this kind of performance, understanding what kind of team Cloud9 actually is, there's no reason to believe that this is the last we are going to talk about Cloud9 in a positive light, even here in the spring split. All right, but that is going to do it for my LTA North semifinals overview and analysis video here in the spring split. Up on the screen, the final look at the bracket that we are going to get here in the LTA North, because there's only one series remaining. It's Grand Finals, the championship matchup here in spring between FlyQuest and between Cloud9. A rematch of winners finals, a rematch of the tiebreaker that we got, or I guess the number 1 seed matchup that we got in the regular season. It is very clear to everyone that these are the 2 best teams in North America. There is no competition there right now. The only question is which one of them is going to be representing the region at MSI. The disappointing part is that they both should be. They absolutely should, and there's really no reason for them not to be. It's a complete travesty and honestly a disaster by Riot to implement this feature where, I don't have anything against the LTA South. I really don't, but, for an LTA South team to be taking this spot over an LTA North team instead of just adding, an LTA South spot and 2 LTA North teams, it's just ridiculous. It doesn't really make any sense to anybody involved, and unfortunately, one of these teams is going to pay the price by not getting an international series because of it, by not getting to play at MSI in North America, by the way, in Canada. So, absolutely ridiculous. But one of these teams will get to represent the region, and it will be whoever is just, good enough on the day. I really don't think there's a gigantic difference in skill level between these two, but I'm going to stick to my guns. I predicted FlyQuest in Winners Finals, and they weren't able to make it work there. I'm going to predict FlyQuest again. I think I have more faith in Cloud9 this time around. I think they played great, obviously, against Shopify, but they played great against FlyQuest as well. I think Fly was the better team in that series, but if there was, a couple of things that just rolled a little bit different, could Cloud9 have walked out of that series 3-2? Absolutely. They 100% could have. I still think Fly on paper kind of projects a bit better because I think they just kind of have this top tier talent that I'm a little bit worried Cloud9 might not have under pressure. Like, are players like Sven and Vulcan going to be able to step up when they need to? They didn't against FlyQuest last time. Like, Loki was okay, but he wasn't as good as Quad. Like, all of these things kind of need to flip for Cloud9 in order to win. That being said, again, they can. Like, they're talented enough to do this, but for now, it's Fly until proven otherwise, and my prediction is going to be 3-1 or 3-2. I'm going to say 3-2. FlyQuest 3-2. I'll give Cloud9 the credit that I'm giving them in terms of my prep. But let me know if you agree or disagree. Do you think Cloud9 has a better chance this time around? Do you think it is just coin flippy? Whoever shows up on the day is going to be able to take the series kind of in the way that I do? Let me know your thoughts and opinions down below. But that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Of course, we're going to be covering the finals in a very similar game-by-game breakdown to what we did here today, hopefully in more than 3 games, but we're doing the same for other regions as well. LCK is finishing up soon. The LPL finals just happened. We'll be covering those. Again, we're going to be covering everything around MSI, every game in the lead up to that tournament. So if you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit the bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all